"You cannot fight this," she whispered, touching the cold metal that had become his prison for an entire decade. "I have no choice. It is the only face I possess," Damien responded, his husky voice shattering the deadly silence of the royal chambers. Was there truly no choice? Or was something far more sinister at play behind that mask? The whispering hall within the obsidian keep never lived up to its name. The silence there was so oppressive that the sound of a trembling breath echoed like a scream off the black stone walls. Guinevere had felt the overwhelming weight of the atmosphere from the moment she crossed the drawbridge. The turrets rose like dark claws against the gray sky, and the ravens circling the keep seemed like harbingers of imminent death. The journey here had lasted 3 days through shadowy forests where dry branches intertwined like broken bones. Her wagon had broken on the second day, forcing her to walk the final miles with the heavy satchel on her shoulders. Her feet bled inside her worn boots, but the physical pain was nothing compared to the terror that grew in her chest with every step toward her destiny. Torches flickered along the endless corridors, casting dancing shadows that seemed to whisper ancient secrets in the dark corners of the immense hall. The air was thick with the scent of melting wax, damp stone, and something more sinister she could not identify. Faded tapestries hung from the walls like dead skin, depicting scenes of bloody battles and mythical creatures that seemed to follow her movements with embroidered eyes. Guinevere, an omega of the forgotten lineage, felt her hands tremble uncontrollably as she clutched the worn leather pouch containing her medical instruments. The metals within tinkled softly with each movement, a sound that normally brought her comfort, but now resonated like funeral bells. Every step toward the throne echoed like a death sentence pronounced by the gods themselves. She was not here for honor or glory. Her family's debt weighed on her shoulders like invisible chains forged by generations of poverty and ill fortune. The annual territory tithes had not been paid, and when the territory wardens appeared at the door of her humble cottage, hooded men with swords at their waists and execution scrolls in their hands, it was her rare gift with herbs and sutures that saved her family from imprisonment or worse. She could still hear her mother's desperate screams as the soldiers dragged her father from the house. Her hands had trembled as she offered her services in place of the coin payment they simply did not possess. Her younger sister, ill for months with a cough that refused to improve, had watched everything from the window with wide, frightened eyes. "Take me," she had whispered to the leader of the territory wardens, a tall man with scars that told stories of violence. "My talents are worth more than our debt." It was a desperate lie, but it worked. Her talents were the only currency accepted in a kingdom where healing was seen as suspicious magic, and healers often disappeared during the night, their bodies found in rivers with strange symbols carved into their skin. The metallic scent of ancient blood and polished silver invaded her nostrils before she even saw the throne. It was a nauseating odor that mixed with the aroma of moldy wood and melted wax. Her worn leather boots made a muffled sound against the faded red carpet that led to the center of absolute power. Before her, emerging from the shadows like an apparition born of the darkest nightmares, sat Alpha Damien Blackwood, the Lycan king. Even seated, his presence dominated the entire hall. He was a man built like a fortress, broad shoulders that bore the weight of a kingdom, hands that had wielded swords and taken lives, a posture that spoke of absolute power even at rest. Legend said he was a monster, a demon who devoured children and drank the blood of virgins to maintain his youth. Stories whispered he had made a pact with shadow entities to gain power over death. Mothers used his name to scare disobedient children, and grown men blessed themselves when they spoke of him. But the reality was infinitely more unsettling than any legend. He was a statue of contained pain, sculpted from tense muscles and heavy silences that seemed to absorb the very light around him. The mask of black iron covered the entire left side of his face, descending to his jawline like a metallic second skin that had become part of his identity. The metal had been crafted by master artisans. Each curve perfectly followed the contours of his face, as if it had been molded directly onto his skin. It was adorned with protective runes that seemed to glow under the weak, flickering torchlight, creating hypnotic patterns that hurt the eyes of those who stared too long. But there was something wrong with the runes. Something that made Guinevere's stomach churn without her knowing exactly why. He did not look at her when he spoke. His golden eyes remained fixed on a distant point, as if she were just another insignificant piece on the deadly chessboard that was his court. His voice was a muffled growl, distorted by the metal that had imprisoned him for an entire decade, each word sounding as if it were forcefully ripped from his throat. "Another healer," he murmured, contempt dripping from each syllable. "How many have come before you? 12? 15? All fled when they saw what hides behind this mask." Guinevere swallowed hard, the metallic taste of fear coating her tongue. But there was something more, something her medical instincts immediately seized upon. The erratic rhythm of his breath, the rigid tension in his shoulders, the way his fingers convulsed against the throne's arms as if battling constant agony. The initial interaction was not one of submission, but of clinical, professional shock. While the court expected the small Omega to cower in reverent terror, Guinevere observed. Her trained eyes noted every detail. The unnatural pallor of his visible skin, the faint beads of sweat forming on his brow, the almost imperceptible tremor in his hands. As he rose to dismiss her with a disdainful royal gesture, a violent coughing fit seized him like a lightning bolt. The sound that echoed through the hall was not merely one of sick or irritated lungs. It was the visceral, sickening rasp of skin tearing against oxidized metal, of raw flesh being pierced by sharp edges with every involuntary movement. The Lycan king collapsed to his knees, his hands flying to the mask as he desperately tried to control the spasms that racked his powerful body. Fresh blood began to ooze from the edges of the metal, creating crimson trails that brutally contrasted with the dark iron. Instinctively, utterly disregarding the protocol that forbade touching royalty without express permission, Guinevere moved forward. Her feet carried her before her mind could process the enormity of what she was doing. Her fingers, calloused from constant work with mortars and medicinal herbs, brushed the edge of the mask. The heat emanating from the metal was feverish, almost searing her fingertips. But it was more than that. There was a strange pulsation, as if the metal itself were alive, feeding on the life force of the man who wore it. Damien recoiled as if branded by hot iron, his golden eyes dilated in an explosive mixture of fury and something far more disturbing, pure, primal fear. It was not the fear of physical harm, but the existential terror of being seen, of having his vulnerabilities exposed to the cruel light of reality. "Do not touch," he roared, his voice distorted and metallic, echoing through the hall like the cry of a caged creature. "No one touches the mask. No one." But it was in that moment of raw vulnerability that Guinevere perceived the first inconvenient truth that would change absolutely everything. The mask was not a war trophy won in glorious battles or an aesthetic vanity to hide combat scars. The metal was, literally and horrifically, fused to his flesh at specific points of chronic infection. The mask's inner edges had integrated into his skin for years, forging a grotesque man-metal symbiosis. The Lycan king wasn't merely hiding a war wound. He was slowly perishing day by day from sepsis wrought by his facial armor. "Your Majesty," she whispered, her medical voice strained by terror. "The infection, it spreads." His eyes narrowed dangerously. "Leave, now, before I order your execution for insubordination." Guinevere had seen too much. Escorted to temporary healer's quarters in the ensuing hours, her medical mind raced. The skin's pallor around the mask, the infection's pattern, his favored side, all pointed to one terrifying conclusion. Someone designed that mask specifically for his slow, agonizing demise. The following weeks forged a perilous, psychological cat-and-mouse game within the royal chambers. The Obsidian Keep was a labyrinth of shadowed corridors and whispered secrets. Guinevere swiftly learned every step was observed, every movement scrutinized by unseen eyes behind tapestries and armor. Damien, paranoid from years of assassination attempts, categorically refused Guinevere near any remotely weapon-like instrument. His past etched a cruel lesson. Death arrived cloaked as healing, and trust was a luxury a Lycan king couldn't afford. His distrust rooted in blood and betrayal. A decade prior, during the autumn equinox gathering, his brother Cale Blackwood had offered a fraternal embrace. The concealed blade found its target surgically, severing flesh, trust, and kin love. The wolfsbane poison coating the weapon burned through his skin like living acid. Subsequent healers were unmasked as disguised spies, patient assassins sowing seeds of death cloaked as treatment. Every salve was tested on prisoners, every medicinal draft analyzed by poison specialists. Guinevere, however, possessed quiet, strategic stubbornness, typical of one who learned survival through utter invisibility. She grew on society's fringes, where omegas of forgotten lineage were disregarded until needed. This enforced invisibility became her greatest strength. Instead of insisting on direct treatments that would only escalate his mounting paranoia, she began a carefully planned campaign of medical guerrilla warfare. Unguents mysteriously appeared on his bedside table each night, always accompanied by small notes penned in a delicate script, explaining the ingredients and effects. Concoctions that eased the pain without requiring physical contact or mutual trust. The sweet scent of lavender mingled with wild honey, humble yet surprisingly potent ingredients, began to permeate the Alpha King's austere chambers. It was a gradual sensory invasion, one he, to his own surprise and mounting unease, did not repel. For the first time in years, the constant stench of death and disinfectant that had dominated his private quarters was gradually supplanted by something that whispered of life, genuine care, and perhaps even hope. The nights became a silent, tension-laden ritual. Guinevere left the unguents when she was certain he was absent, but often felt his golden eyes watching her from gaps in doors or reflections in ancient mirrors. It was a perilous dance of approach and retreat, where every gesture carried weight and meaning. "Why lavender?" he rasped one night, his voice muffled by the mask as he observed the small blue glass vial left beside his pillow. It was the first personal question he had posed in years, and the sound of his own curiosity startled him. Guinevere, who had been organizing clean bandages across the chamber, froze like a deer hearing twigs snap in the forest. It was the first time he had initiated conversation that wasn't direct command, veiled threat, or cold dismissal. "It reduces inflammation," she replied carefully, without turning to face him directly. Her fingers worked automatically, folding the linen, but her mind raced. "And honey possesses natural antibacterial properties. Together, they create a hostile environment for infection, without causing additional irritation to already sensitized skin." A long, heavy silence descended, filled only by the hypnotic crackle of flames in the hearth and the distant wail of wind through the keep's towers. The storm outside seemed to echo the internal maelstrom of both. "How long have you known about the mask?" The question was so low she barely heard it, but it carried the weight of a confession torn from the depths of his soul. Guinevere finally turned, her eyes meeting his for the first time since she had arrived at the keep weeks ago. His golden eyes were filled with a raw vulnerability that cut through her defenses like a honed blade. "From the first day," she admitted, her medical voice emerging through layers of caution. "The infection has a very specific scent that I learned to recognize as a child, and the way the metal reacts to your body's heat. It's unnatural. There is dark magic at work there, something designed to impede healing, and still you remained." It was not a question, but an observation laden with something dangerously close to gratitude, mixed with utter disbelief. The first true turning point occurred in the second month of her stay. A savage blizzard completely isolated the obsidian keep from the outside world, transforming the fortress into an icy prison. The winds howled through the ancient stones like tormented souls, and the temperature plummeted to blood-freezing levels. It was during that night of tempest that Damien collapsed completely, The fever had rendered him delirious, his body trembling uncontrollably as it fought against the infection that had finally found an opening to spread. His inner werewolf was in absolute panic, desperately clawing at his mind, yet utterly unable to emerge due to devastating physical weakness. Guinevere found him fallen to his chamber floor, convulsing violently as fresh blood seeped from the mask's edges. There was no time for protocols or permissions, no time for fear or hesitation. With precise movements born of years of medical experience, she locked the heavy doors of the royal chambers, directly defying the orders of the royal guard who demanded immediate entry. With steady hands, yet a heart thrumming like war drums, she administered a potent sedative extracted from valerian roots she had secretly gathered from the keep's gardens. There was no longer choice or alternative. The mask needed to be removed to fully drain the infection that was literally killing the Lycan king from the inside out. As she worked on the oxidized buckles that held the metal clamped to his face, her hands discovered something that would absolutely change everything about her understanding of the situation. The buckles were not merely oxidized by time and use. They had been deliberately fused with a special alloy that rendered them impossible to remove without specific tools. More terrifying still, the runes etched into the mask's inner surface were not for protection, as all believed and publicly proclaimed. They were runes of containment, ancient symbols specifically designed to prevent a werewolf's natural healing ability from functioning properly. The war accident had been more than merely physical. It was an elaborate and cruel magical trap, meticulously designed to slowly torture and kill. Someone, intimately close to the Lycan king, had orchestrated this horror for years, keeping the wound perpetually open under the convincing pretense of structural support and royal protection. The betrayal was not buried in the distant past. It lived and breathed within the very obsidian keep walls. Being renewed and fed with each passing day, the mask remained fused to the face of the man it was meant to protect. When the mask finally released with a moist, utterly nauseating sound of flesh tearing from corroded metal, accompanied by a sizzle like burning flesh, Guinevere forced herself not to recoil in horror. The stench that rose from the exposed wound was indescribable. Chronic infection mingled with oxidized metal and something deeper, more sinister, that brought tears to her eyes. Damien's face was a brutal map of human violence and prolonged suffering. Silvery scars of chemical burns mingled grotesquely with raw, irritated granulation tissue that had never been given a chance to heal properly. The skin around the edges where the metal had fused was necrotic in places, alive in others, creating an irregular tapestry of destruction and desperate attempts at healing. But as her medical eyes automatically cataloged the damage, mentally listing the necessary treatments, the antibiotics she would need to prepare, the delicate surgeries that would be required, it was something else entirely that stole her breath. Beneath the damaged and deformed skin, beginning just below the jawline and extending until it disappeared under the collar of his tunic, pulsed a dormant mate mark. The intricate, interwoven lines that formed the sacred symbol of destiny were ash-gray and faded by the utter lack of contact and mutual recognition. But they were undeniably real and pulsed with a faint but persistent energy. The pattern was unique, like a spiritual fingerprint that existed only between two individuals destined by nature itself to be one. She had studied these marks in ancient texts, knew they appeared only when true mates drew physically close after years of separation. But to see one on Damien's skin, throbbing faintly like a dying heart, struck her like lightning splitting the night sky. The physical shock made her take a stumbling step backward. The basin of medicinal water she held slipped from her numb hands, shattering on the stone floor with a crash that echoed through the chamber like a funeral bell announcing imminent death. Water and medicinal herbs spread across the floor, forming pools that reflected the firelight like spilled blood. She was the fated mate of the monster all feared, not merely a temporary healer or a servant coerced by circumstance. She was, by the will of the very gods and the weave of destiny, one half of the soul of the most powerful and feared man in the kingdom. The cruel irony of the situation struck her like a hammer. She had spent weeks hiding in the shadows, trying to be invisible, when destiny had placed her precisely where she was always meant to be. The terror that invaded her was not physical fear, but something far deeper and existential. He was a king, born of pure lineage tracing back to the first werewolves who walked the earth. His blood carried centuries of power, magic, and divine right to the throne. She was an indebted Omega, daughter of a family barely able to pay their annual territory tithes, whose surname had been forgotten even by the kingdom's official records. If he knew of the sacred connection binding them, he would immediately think she had used shadow weaving to artificially forge the bond and gain political power through supernatural seduction. Or worse, he would publicly reject her for her weak lineage and inferior social standing, declaring the bond a mockery of the gods or a cosmic error. Guinevere made the most excruciating and painful decision of her life in that moment. She would conceal the sacred bond as if it were a deadly secret, treating him merely as another patient in need of impersonal medical care. With hands trembling violently from repressed emotion and a heart shattering, she meticulously cleaned the open wounds, applied healing pastes made from rare herbs she had secretly gathered in the keep's gardens, and repositioned the mask far more loosely than before. The new position finally allowed proper airflow to facilitate healing, yet maintained the pretense that nothing had fundamentally changed. All of this was done with surgical precision and a broken heart, before he awoke from the unconscious state induced by the sedatives she had administered. Damien's gradual recovery brought a completely new and dangerous dynamic to their relationship. Without the constant, debilitating pressure of active infection, his mind cleared like mist dissipating in the morning sun. His Lycan senses, long dulled by chronic pain and the side effects of shadow weaving, began to awaken and sharpen once more, like musical instruments being tuned after years of silence. He immediately noted every subtle change in Guinevere's demeanor, the careful way she avoided meeting his gaze directly, as if fearful of what she might see reflected there, the almost imperceptible tremor in her hands when she needed to take his pulse, her fingers recoiling from his skin as if his touch burned her, the visible tension in her shoulders when he spoke directly to her, as if each word were a potential trap. But there was something more, something his Lycan instincts perceived, even if his conscious mind could not fully process it. Her scent had subtly shifted over the past weeks. It was still lavender and honey, but beneath that, something deeper, more personal, an aroma that made his inner wolf rumble low with recognition and possessiveness. He interpreted these changes as growing revulsion and disgust for what she had seen beneath the mask. The cruel, devastating irony was that, while he felt like a monster increasingly unworthy of any form of affection, acceptance, or even simple human tolerance, she felt like an imposter, utterly unworthy of being in the presence of her fated mate. Nevertheless, the forced proximity brought about by medical circumstances began to awaken instincts that had lain dormant for an entire decade of compelled slumber. Damien's inner wolf, suppressed and nearly extinguished by the cursed mask, began to show signs of life he had not experienced since before his brother's attack. He found himself actively searching for her scent in the labyrinthine corridors of the Obsidian Keep, following trails of lavender and something deeper, more primal and personal. When other males of the court approached the infirmary where she worked, young nobles asking about her services, or wounded soldiers lingering longer than necessary during treatments, a low, menacing growl vibrated in his chest, a reaction he could not entirely control. It was pure, primal possessiveness, the kind of territorial instinct he had learned to completely suppress during years of necessary political control. But now, with his strength gradually returning, his inner wolf's basic instincts were awakening along with his body. Chief Advisor Varric Hawthorne, the secret architect behind the cursed mask, immediately noticed both the king's obvious physical improvement and the growing, inexplicable influence of the insignificant little healer. Varric had spent an entire decade consolidating power through Damien's weakness, building a network of allies and debtors who depended on the king's inability to exert full power. The possibility of losing this carefully cultivated political advantage terrified him more than any enemy army marching towards the borders. A healthy Damien, in total control of his faculties, signified the end of Varric's influence, the end of his ability to direct the kingdom's politics through manipulation and controlled information. He began a subtle but utterly vicious campaign of sowing doubt and suspicion, whispering into the ears of influential courtiers and members of the royal guard that Guinevere was employing forbidden shadowcraft to ensnare and mentally control the Alpha. False evidences of witchcraft mysteriously appeared in her chambers overnight. Wax dolls with dark hair tied with red ribbon, circles of salt and strange herbs that could be interpreted as components for mind control rituals, scrolls with symbols resembling seduction enchantments. She arrived when he was weakest, he would whisper to ears eager to believe. And observe how he changes when she is near. This is not natural healing. It is bewitchment. The seeds of paranoia found fertile ground in a court already accustomed to conspiracy and betrayal. The 4th month brought the conflict to its devastating apex. During the Crimson Moon Conclave, when supernatural energies reached their annual peak, Kale, the treacherous brother who had been exiled after the original assassination attempt, returned from the wildlands with an army of rogues at the borders of the Blackwood territory. Kale did not arrive as a supplicant, begging for forgiveness. He came as a conqueror, demanding justice, publicly declaring that Damien was a broken wolf, permanently incapable of leading the nation through the dark times ahead. By ancient Lycan law, which was more sacred than any royal decree, a king who could not fully transform held no legitimate right to reign over werewolves. The formal challenge was issued to the thunder of war drums echoing across the surrounding mountains. Damien, still recovering, but driven by royal pride and an almost suicidal desire to shield his people from devastating civil war, accepted the duel without hesitation. Guinevere knew with absolute medical certainty that he would die. The runes on the mask, though loosened to allow for treatment, still drastically inhibited his capacity for full transformation. He would enter the arena as a man fighting a giant wolf, a death sentence disguised as royal honor. On the night before the duel, as the full moon bathed the obsidian keep in ominous silver light, she stormed into his chambers. She did not arrive as a healer with professional responsibilities, but as a desperate woman facing the imminent loss of everything that had come to mean life to her. "You cannot fight wearing this," she whispered, her hands touching the cold metal of the mask that had become simultaneously a shield and a cage. "I have no choice. It is the only face I have," Damien replied, his hoarse voice laden with a resignation that tolled like funeral bells. "It is not," she countered with an intensity that surprised even herself. And for the first time since discovering the mate bond, she consciously allowed her omega pheromone to fully flood the room, a sweet, earthy scent of home and safety, undeniable to any werewolf. The revelation of their mate bond shattered every emotional and physical barrier Damien had painstakingly erected over years of isolation. Primal fury and savage desire collided in an explosive surge of emotion that left him utterly vulnerable. He did not reject her or push her away as she had feared. Instead, he collapsed to his knees before her, his powerful arms encircling her delicate waist, as he buried his masked face against her belly. The raw vulnerability of the moment was palpable, filling the air like electricity before a storm. But their happiness and recognition were tragically brief. Chief Advisor Varric Hawthorne chose this precise moment of intimacy to burst in with the territory wardens, accusing Guinevere of high treason for bewitching the Lycan king, magically before the combat that would determine the future of the kingdom. Damien, emotionally weakened by the revelation and politically manipulated by years of conditioning, was forced to watch Guinevere be dragged into the obsidian dungeons for her own protection until the duel concluded and the magical influence could be thoroughly investigated. The duel in the Frostfall Caldera arena was brutal beyond any description words could convey. The arena had been specially prepared with blades of black ice extracted from the depths of the surrounding mountains. Ice so pure, It reflected the full moon's light as distorted mirrors that captured and twisted every movement of the combatants. The multitude surrounding the arena in stone stands was in absolute silence, a quiet more deafening than any scream. Nobles and servants mingled in the stands, united only by the collective terror of witnessing what could be the end of a dynasty. Cale Blackwood had arrived fully transformed into his giant wolf form, a magnificent and terrifying creature with silver fur that gleamed like liquid metal beneath the moonlight. His eyes blazed like red embers, and every movement he made left deep marks on the hard ice. It was a display of pure power, an exhibition of everything Damien had lost and could never reclaim. The contrast was brutal and humiliating. Damien fought desperately in his limited human form, each movement clearly painful, every breath a struggle against the mask that still partially restrained his transformations. His muscles, though powerful, were nothing compared to the supernatural strength of a giant wolf in a fury. Cale's every blow was calculated not merely to wound, but to publicly humiliate his brother before the entire kingdom. The mask was gradually dented and deformed by precise, sadistic attacks, each impact repeatedly tearing the newly scarred skin until fresh blood flowed like crimson rivers over the black ice, creating abstract patterns of violence that spread like macabre art. "You are not worthy," Cale roared, his voice half human, half beast. "A king who cannot transform is no king at all. You are an abomination, a broken wolf who should have been left to die 10 years ago." Damien stumbled, collapsing to his knees on the bloodied ice. His breath plumed in the frigid air, each exhalation possibly his last. The crowd of subjects watched in horrified silence at the seemingly inevitable fall of their king, some already whispering prayers for the dead. In the freezing obsidian dungeons beneath the arena, Guinevere worked frantically, utilizing her intimate knowledge of the keep's ancient secret passages, knowledge acquired through months of obsessively studying medieval architecture to avoid unnecessary encounters with hostile nobility. The stones were damp and moss-covered, and the stench of moisture and centuries of imprisonment was almost unbearable. She did not attempt to flee and save her own life, though that was the logical, sensible option. Instead, she ran towards the distant sound of combat, because she knew with absolute medical certainty and primal instinct that the only way to utterly nullify the magic of the containment runes was with the blood of a fated mate, freely offered out of true love, not obligation or duty. Entering the arena through a maintenance passage that opened directly into the center of the combat field, small and seemingly fragile against the supernatural giants in mortal combat, Guinevere emerged like an apparition. Her simple tunic fluttered in the icy wind, and her dark hair whipped around her face like a somber halo. Kyle readied for the final blow, his claws raised to tear at Damien's throat, when she physically placed herself between them. The giant werewolf paused, confused by the audacity of the interruption, his crimson eyes focusing on the small human figure who dared interfere in a sacred duel. The silence that followed was utterly absolute, as if the world itself had ceased breathing, as if even the wind had hushed to observe. With a surgical dagger she had concealed in her boot, a thin, sharp blade designed for precision, not violence, she did not attack the enemy as everyone expected, and as would be logical to do. Instead, in an act of sacrifice that defied all logic and self-preservation, she deliberately slashed the palm of her own hand. The blade sank deep, severing veins and allowing rich, dark crimson blood to flow freely. Without hesitation, she pressed the open wound directly against Damien's masked face. Her blood reacted instantly with the cursed runes, igniting a chemical and magical explosion of pure energy. Chief Advisor Varric Hawthorne's shadow weaving, meticulously spun over years, dissolved with a deafening hiss that echoed through the Frostfall Caldera arena, like the scream of 1,000 dying demons simultaneously. The metal shattered and broke apart like fractured glass, unleashing an entire decade of imprisoned pain, rage, and power. Damien screamed, not from physical pain, but a primal roar of absolute spiritual liberation, a soul finally unshackled. For the first time in 10 unending years, His transformation was complete, glorious, and devastatingly powerful. The Lycan King erupted from his human skin in an explosion of pure might that made the very air vibrate. He was larger than any werewolf that had ever walked the earth, more terrifying and magnificent than any legend had ever managed to adequately describe. His fur was black as the deepest night, with silver flecks that shimmered like stars. His golden eyes now blazed with an inner fire, and every movement he made radiated absolute power and unquestionable authority. Cale Blackwood was subdued in seconds, not killed by mercy, but forced into total submission before the true restored hierarchy. Chief Advisor Varric Hawthorne attempted to flee through the emergency exits, but he was captured by his own guards, who finally realized the full extent of his manipulation and betrayal. In the center of the arena, surrounded by fractured ice and splatters of blood, the enormous black werewolf turned to the small Omega, who trembled as much from the cold as from emotional exhaustion. Instead of attacking or demonstrating dominance, he lowered his massive head in a gesture of absolute reverence, carefully licking the blood from her wounded hand in a public and undeniable act of devotion and total submission to his mate. The epilogue unfolded months later, as the physical and emotional wounds finally began to heal properly. Winter had given way to spring, and with it came a complete transformation not just of the Obsidian Keep, but of the entire kingdom. Damien never again wore any type of mask or facial covering, openly displaying the scars that told the story of his survival. His face still bore deep and permanent marks from a decade of torture, but they had become something entirely different. They were no longer symbols of shame, but medals of honor that spoke of resilience, survival, and the courage to allow someone to love him completely. The first visible shift was in the very bones of the Obsidian Keep. The dark, forbidding stones began to shed their somber hue, gradually replaced by lighter, gleaming materials. Gardens blossomed where empty courtyards once lay barren, vibrant life pushing through ancient rock. The Whispering Hall, once a crypt of hushed dread, was reborn as the Hall of Healing, its ancient stones now resounding with the joyous symphony of ordinary life, laughter, and even music. Guinevere's unwavering presence at Damien's side, not a submissive shadow, but a formidable equal, utterly redefined the very essence of strength within the kingdom. It was she who championed the creation of the first royal hospital, a sanctuary where all castes, from nobles to the lowest servants, received equal care, shattering centuries of ingrained social barriers. The reforms they implemented together were nothing short of revolutionary. The oppressive system of annual territory tithes, which had condemned families like Guinevere's to perpetual servitude, was entirely dismantled. In its stead, they forged a new order, rooted in the sacred contribution of inherent talents, allowing healers, artisans, and farmers to fulfill their obligations by offering the very best of their craft. The true triumph, however, transcended the mere defeat of a traitorous brother or the unmasking of a corrupt advisor. It lay in the dismantling of the cultural lie that vulnerability equated to weakness. Damien, the Lycan King, learned that true royalty resided not in physical perfection, but in the profound courage to allow another to witness the most shattered fragments of one's soul. Cale was not condemned to death, but exiled to distant lands, granted the arduous chance to forge a new existence. Breaking the cycle of familial violence, Damien knew, was the only path to secure a different future for their bloodline. Varric Hawthorne, however, faced the full, unyielding weight of justice, destined to spend his final days within the very obsidian dungeons where he had plotted Guinevere's imprisonment. And Guinevere, the forgotten Omega who had arrived as a mere debt payment, ascended to become the sole entity in the kingdom the Lycan King genuinely feared to lose. She had proven, with every heartbeat, that the hand that healed with unconditional love possessed infinite power beyond any hand that wounded with anger or ambition. Together, they reshaped a kingdom once forged in fear into something akin to an extended family, where true strength emanated from the capacity to protect and nurture, not merely to conquer and dominate. In the quiet of their nights, Damien's fingers would tenderly trace the scars upon Guinevere's palm, the sacred marks of the blood that had shattered a decade-long curse. "You saved my life," he whispered. "We saved each other," she replied. "And we saved all that comes after." If you loved this tale of a love that broke a 10-year curse and transformed pain into power, subscribe for more epic Lycan King romances. Hit that notification bell so you don't miss new stories about second chances and fated loves that defy all odds. Remember, sometimes the most potent healing comes from those who have been wounded most deeply.